Near Okinawa, a large group of Japanese aircraft launched an attack on American ships. Though the U.S. lost 3 destroyers and 7 planes in the assault, the Japanese suffered far greater losses. After scout planes had located the enemy, a fast carrier task force was deployed to intercept the Japanese planes. A total of 341 attacking aircraft were destroyed, with 245 downed by carrier aircraft, 55 by fighters, and 51 by anti-aircraft fire. This marked the beginning of a disastrous day for the Japanese. Carrier aircraft launched attacks on the Yamato, a 45,000-ton battleship, the last of its kind in the Japanese fleet. The ship was struck by at least 3 rockets and 8 heavy bombs, sinking around 50 miles southwest of Kyushu, the southernmost island of Japan. Additionally, 2 cruisers and 3 destroyers were sunk, and more destroyers were left burning. Only a few destroyers from the entire Japanese force managed to escape, though they were severely damaged by rockets and machine gun fire. The destruction of the Yamato dealt a significant blow to the Japanese, but for the pilots involved in the mission, it was likely a moment of great pride and celebration. Between combat missions, the Corsairs were carefully maintained by the ground crews, who worked diligently to keep the aircraft in peak condition. These men were tasked with ensuring the safety and readiness of the pilots and their planes. Every mechanical system of the Corsair had to be checked and rechecked, adjusted, tightened, and sometimes rebuilt to ensure no failure would occur during the complex maneuvers the aircraft and its pilot would perform. In many ways, the ground crews were just as vital as the pilots. The lives of those in the air depended on the expertise and attention to detail. After each combat mission, the pilots were checked off individually by the squadron leader. While the planes were being refueled, it was critical that every pilot was accounted for. Sometimes, as seen in the case of De Fabio on the checklist, that would mean a tense wait. When the scramble order was given, it was a fast scramble. The men of the 4th Marine Air Wing were ready and eager, knowing a squadron of Japanese fighters had been sighted 20 miles south of the base. There was no time to waste. The urgency of the situation kept everyone on high alert, and the pilots and ground crews worked in seamless coordination. It was uncertain whether the Japanese fighters intended to attack, but the Marines weren't willing to take any chances. If the enemy fighters did plan to strike the base, the Allies would be ready for a fierce defense. During World War II, the sheer number of aces achieved by the Allied nations was unprecedented. Great Britain produced over 1,200 aces, but the United States led the way with 1,281. In contrast, Japan only managed 26 aces, likely a result of their reliance on kamikaze tactics rather than traditional aerial dogfights. From the sea, the view was just as dramatic as from the sky. A pilot executed a perfect maneuver to recover his aircraft from a nosedive, narrowly avoiding disaster and preventing a plunge into the sea. Perhaps the most stunning image captured was that of a carrier destroyed in a violent explosion. A mushroom cloud erupted from the impact, rising hundreds of feet and scattering debris into the ocean. Many planes that were downed during the war were victims of anti-aircraft fire from ships, highlighting the constant danger the pilots faced, not only from enemy fighters, but from the intense defenses of the ships they were attacking. The efficiency of the ship's guns in repelling attacks was crucial, but not all losses were due to enemy fire. Some pilots met unfortunate fates while attempting to land back on the carrier. One pilot, missing his hook, skidded across the deck, while another less fortunate pilot ended up caught in a devastating fireball after making a critical mistake. The tragedy of another pilot who came in too fast, running right off the edge of the carrier, added to the heavy toll. Given the sheer number of aircraft lost during the war, there was little time or manpower to clean up the wreckage. Burnt-out planes scattered across makeshift runways became a grim symbol of the conflict, a veritable airplane graveyard. In most cases, these downed planes came to rest on farms, and the on-site fire crews had the daunting task of putting out the fires. Firefighting in such circumstances was a dangerous and skilled operation, and the men who battled these infernos were well aware of the immense risks involved. The intensity of these aviation fires was often unparalleled, with the firefighters facing challenges few domestic house fires could rival. These brave men were specially trained in aviation firefighting and carrier-based firefighting, knowing full well that they were working with planes that carried hundreds of gallons of fuel. A single misstep could prove fatal. One Hellcat pilot was fortunate to escape his burning plane, but most crashes on carriers were far less forgiving. Kamikaze attacks were frequent, but sometimes crashes were simply tragic accidents. In many cases, fires on ships go out of control, and despite the best efforts of the fire crew, they could only hope to rescue a few survivors. Even the most skilled firefighters often found themselves powerless in the face of certain wreckages. Many planes, when they crashed, disintegrated mid-air and were lost to the sea. Those that crashed burning were quickly extinguished, but the damage caused by these destructive crashes was often irreversible. A carrier hit by such attacks stood little chance of survival, given the vast stores of aviation fuel on board that only increased the potential for disaster. The dramatic images of carriers exploding and disappearing into the sea underscore the dangers of naval warfare. However, amid such destruction, the New Zealand Navy made significant contributions to the war effort, demonstrating exceptional skill in carrier landings. Their pilots, often more prone to bouncing the Corsairs during landings than their British counterparts, had a more laid-back, yet equally effective approach to carrier operations. The camaraderie and bond between pilots was palpable, not just among the New Zealanders, but also across all nations involved. The friendships formed during the war often lasted a lifetime, exemplifying the strong sense of teamwork that transcended nationalities. Many of the 1,200 British aces included pilots from New Zealand, with their highest-scoring ace, C.F. Gray, downing 28 enemy aircraft. While New Zealand pilots were known for their fun-loving, enthusiastic spirit, their flying style reflected their can-do attitude. Yet, not all Corsair pilots had the luxury of sunny beaches and warm temperatures. In the winter months, the extreme cold posed its own set of challenges, with thick snow threatening to damage the engines of the Corsairs if left uncovered, illustrating the diverse and harsh conditions in which these pilots operated. The challenges faced by the ground crews maintaining the Corsairs were immense. The corrosion from the salt in snow and seawater was a constant threat, especially to the weaponry, requiring regular cleaning and oiling to prevent malfunction. The engineers likely longed for the warmer conditions of the Pacific beaches, but the severe cold was far less taxing than the oppressive heat of the Pacific summer. The Corsair's impressive combat record speaks to its effectiveness and durability during World War II. It flew 64,051 missions, with over 54,000 of them launched from land bases, while the remaining 9,581 were launched from aircraft carriers. It achieved a remarkable kill ratio, downing 2,140 enemy aircraft, with just 189 Corsairs lost to combat. However, the aircraft also faced significant losses, including 349 shoot-down by anti-aircraft fire, 164 lost in landing accidents, and 992 for other reasons. Overall, 1,694 Corsairs were lost out of the 12,571 built. The harsh conditions of storms at sea made the job of the deck crews even more challenging. In rough weather, the danger of a missed knot could send a Corsair overboard, and while launching aircraft in these conditions was still possible, landing them under low visibility remained hazardous. As World War II ended in 1945, the legacy of the Corsair was firmly established. The war had caused unimaginable destruction and loss of life, but the contributions of aircraft like the Corsair marked significant advancements in aviation. Its performance in combat, both in the skies and on the ground, had exceeded expectations. The Corsair had become the ultimate fighter, outclassing its contemporaries in both design and capabilities. It had saved countless Allied lives, showcasing not only the power of its engineering, but also the skill of the pilots who flew it. The Corsair's role in securing victory for the Allies ensured its place in history as one of the most iconic aircraft of the war. Its contributions to aviation, advancing both design and piloting, had revolutionized the field. The legacy of the Corsair, built on resilience and innovation, would continue to resonate long after the conflict had ended. The outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 brought with it the return of the Corsair to combat, despite the aircraft's age. The North Korean invasion of South Korea triggered an international response, with the United States leading a United Nations coalition in support of South Korea. Although the Corsair had been a stalwart during World War II, by the time of the Korean War, aviation had seen rapid developments, and the aircraft's role was now seen in a new context. With the experience gained from World War II, pilots and ground crews were able to operate the Corsair with efficiency and confidence, facing no major mechanical issues that had plagued them in the earlier years of the aircraft's service. The Corsair continued to prove its effectiveness in combat, and its legacy as one of the best fighters ever built persisted through the conflict. However, the Korean War also marked a turning point in aviation, as the world saw the first large-scale use of jet aircraft in combat. The jet age was on the horizon, and although the Corsair was still a formidable presence, the shift to faster, more advanced jets was imminent. Even with the Corsair's continuing success, the era of propeller-driven aircraft was beginning to give way to the new age of jet-powered fighters. This shift in aviation technology marked a significant change in how wars were fought, but the Corsair's place in history remained secure as a legend of two major conflicts. The Korean War continued the brutal legacy of warfare, with destruction and devastation at its core. As in World War II, aerial bombardment became a primary tactic, with napalm bombs often incinerating entire villages. The use of napalm was controversial, but it was seen as a necessary evil to break the will of the enemy. Meanwhile, the potential for nuclear warfare loomed on the horizon, with discussions about its use as a means to end the conflict swiftly. Fortunately, those discussions never progressed to actual deployment, and the world was spared the devastating consequence of nuclear warfare. Even with the increased experience and professionalism of the Corsair crews, accidents still occurred. The example of the incorrectly mounted rocket falling off the aircraft serves as a reminder of the dangers present in wartime operations. While the deck crew responded quickly, the potential for disaster was ever present. Their decision to discard the rocket into the sea was the only safe option, avoiding what could have been a catastrophic explosion on the ship. This incident highlights the unpredictable nature of wartime operations, where split-second decisions can make the difference between life and death. Despite the mistakes and the chaos of war, the professionalism and quick thinking of the crews continued to shine through. The Korean War indeed marked a transformative period in aviation, as the rapid advance of jet technology shifted the landscape of aerial combat. The MiG-15, a Soviet-built jet, and the American-made F-86 Saber became the dominant fighters in the skies, engaging in numerous dogfights, especially over the region known as MiG Alley, a hotbed of intense aerial activity. The arrival of jets rendered the propeller-driven aircraft, like the Corsair, less effective in direct combat, as their performance was outpaced by the speed and agility of jet-powered planes. The shift to jet fighters also had a significant impact on the fate of the Corsair. With the rise of the jet age, older prop-driven aircraft were phased out or relegated to secondary roles. The comparison between the Corsair and the Phantom is a fascinating one, especially considering the unique strengths of the older Corsair in certain scenarios. While the Phantom, a jet-powered fighter, was indeed faster and more advanced in terms of technology, the Corsair still held significant advantages, particularly in terms of its payload and range. By the time the Korean War armistice was signed in 1953, the Corsair had proven itself as a reliable workhorse, and its continued use alongside more modern jet aircraft showcased its enduring legacy. The armistice marked the end of a brutal conflict, but it also marked a significant moment in the history of aviation, as the shift from propeller-driven fighters to jets was now irreversible. The narrative of human flight has evolved greatly over the past century, from early pioneers to the high-tech jets of today. While the early dreams of flight have been largely realized, the journey of aviation continues to captivate and inspire, just as it did for those early aviators and engineers who pushed the boundaries of what was possible. It sounds like you're referencing the F4U Corsair, which was indeed a remarkable and powerful aircraft, one of the most iconic of World War II. The Corsair was designed by Chance Vought, and it's incorporated innovative engineering to create a highly capable fighter. Its impressive speed of 462 miles per hour, formidable firepower, and rugged design made it a dominant force in the Pacific theater. The F4U Corsair's distinct inverted gull wings, which were necessary for ground clearance to accommodate a large propeller and powerful engine, set it apart visually from the aircraft of its era. In combat, the Corsair proved its worth, especially with its performance in naval battles and its role in close air support and air superiority. With more than 12,500 built, it became one of the most successful carrier-based fighters of World War II, continuing its service into the Korean War. Despite being designed primarily for combat, its legacy endures as a symbol of engineering excellence, durability, and the high performance that military aircraft of the time were striving for.
On December 17, 1950, while patrolling Korean airspace, a United States Air Force F-86 Saber spotted the distinct silhouette of a Model 15 MiG below. The Saber's pilot descended rapidly towards the target and maneuvered behind the Soviet-built aircraft. The MiG swerved to evade the American pilot's sights, momentarily appearing as if it were the Predator. However, it took only a few minutes for the American pilot to position himself for this shot, and within seconds, the struggle for air superiority over Korea, with the prestige of two opposing philosophies at stake, had begun. The history of jet-powered fighters actually dates back to before the Second World War. The first Allied jet fighter to enter service was the British Gloucester Meteor. Utilizing two centrifugal flow engines, the Meteor increased fighter speeds from the previous maximum of 400 miles per hour to around 500 miles per hour. These Meteors were stationed in Europe just before the end of the Second World War. They garnered significant interest from American airmen, as the United States Air Force didn't have an equivalent jet fighter in service at that time. In fact, the Meteor saw very little combat, primarily being kept in England to prevent the new technology from falling into enemy hands. However, it proved vitally useful for shooting down the V-1 weapons fired against Britain, a role where its high speed was a significant advantage. The British fear of the Meteor falling into German hands was somewhat paradoxical, as Germany was at least a year ahead in jet design and had flown jet-powered aircraft before the war. Here, a young German pilot received some last-minute advice before his first jet flight. Undoubtedly, the Luftwaffe's most impressive success was the Messerschmitt 262. This excellent aircraft, powered by two axial flow jet engines, was actually faster than the Meteor. Additionally, it featured a successful aerodynamic shape, and later models were designed to utilize a swept wing philosophy that German engineers were developing at the time. Over 1,500 Messerschmitt 262s were built, but on Hitler's insistence, many were designated for a bomber role, a function for which the Swallow, as it was known, was not ideally suited. Eventually, and initially unofficially, the German High Command permitted the 262 to be used as a fighter. In the short time it served in this capacity, the 262's remarkable speed wreaked havoc among Allied bombers. Unfortunately for the Germans, the 262 came just too late to save the Third Reich, but it did give the Allies another insight as to the possibilities of jet development. Focusing more on improving piston engine design, America didn't begin developing jet technology until 1942. Had the war continued, the excellent Lockheed Shooting Star would have been its first combat jet. This is a photo reconnaissance version, but the basic fighter, which saw service for many years, was essentially the same. The Republic Thunderjet offered further improvements, with a slender, streamlined fuselage and more powerful jet engines. However, both the P-80 and the P-84 used a straight wing design that wasn't significantly different from the shapes employed during World War II. The North American Aviation Company initially adopted a conventional straight-wing layout for its first jet. However, they gained access to data on German swept-wing technology immediately after the war, leading them to modify the wing and tailplane positions into a swept-back format. The P-86 Saber, as it became known, ultimately incorporated many other advanced features, such as the all-moving tailplane, automatic slats on the wing, and powered air brakes. Most importantly, its swept surfaces reduced air resistance, allowing for higher speeds. At the heart of the P-86 was a General Electric J47 jet engine, which utilized the axial flow principle, similar to that used in the earlier German Me-262, but now more sophisticated and refined. The jet concept operated on the principle of air being drawn in through the nose intake of the aircraft, then passing into an axial flow compressor area where the air is progressively compressed through 12 different stages. It's then forced into the combustion chambers where atomized fuel is injected and ignited. The resulting combustion and expansion of exhaust gases provide the necessary thrust and also drive the compressor, allowing the cycle to continue. The thrust produced by this jet engine technology was something that ground crew also had to adapt to. No-go areas were declared in front of the engine intake to prevent personnel from being sucked in, and behind the jet because of the phenomenal blast. One problem all jet engines had compared to piston aircraft was their vast fuel consumption. In the confined space of a fighter's fuselage, every square inch of available space was dedicated to fuel storage. The Saber, like many other fighters, also employed drop tanks to provide extra kerosene. Most Sabers that went into production were equipped with 6 50mm machine guns as standard armament, mounted on each side of the heavily armoured pilot's position. Mainly due to the advantages of the swept wing at high speed, the Saber went into production on October 16, 1947, with an initial order of 33 F-86A and 190 F-86B aircraft, which were later reclassified as F-86As. From the moment a pilot pushed the external switch to operate the powered canopy, they were stepping into a new world. Once inside, the pilot would first check the ejector seat locking pins, which couldn't be removed until shortly before taxiing to prevent accidental firing while the plane was still on the ground. They would then take stock of the staggering array of controls and instrumentation integral to the new technology. Managing a Saber was far more complex than the stick and rudder techniques required of earlier planes. Here, 5,200 pounds of thrust had to be controlled and directed to propel what was at the time the world's fastest fighter.
George Tower, this is Air Force 184 requesting taxi clearance, over.
Air Force 184, this is George Tower. Traffic southwest, cleared to runway 21 right.
One difference between jet-powered and piston engines is that jet engines take some time to build up the necessary thrust to get the aircraft off the ground. This was particularly true for heavier jet bombers, but even fighters needed to build up thrust before takeoff. If you look carefully at this shot, you can see the automatic leading edge flaps open, providing the pilot with more control at low speeds. In every respect, the Saber was an aircraft for fighter pilots, and its nimbleness and agility were to prove invaluable in the years to come. During this period, the Air Force replaced the designation P for pursuit with the more fitting F for fighter, renaming the Saber the F-86. Throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s, the Air Force showcased the Saber's performance in numerous public displays. These demonstrations often featured up to 80 aircraft flying in intricate formations, showcasing their aerial skills. The breaking of the sound barrier was still a novelty, and although by then it was a routine for the pilots, at these airshows it was a highlight of the day for the crowds. Public confidence in American air power became crucial in 1949 when the Soviets demonstrated a formidable capability. They had replicated the American B-29 long-range bombers, capable of reaching the US on one-way missions. Moreover, they successfully detonated an atomic bomb, ending America's nuclear monopoly. This, alongside deteriorating US-Soviet relations, sparked significant concern. To counter potential Russian threats, production of the Saber was ramped up, and an all-weather variant was developed, the F-86D Saber Dog. This aircraft featured a sophisticated radar scanner mounted over the nose to detect enemy bombers in all-weather conditions, including at night. It also carried a rack of unguided rockets in the fuselage, deemed more effective for engaging attacking Russian bombers. When conflict erupted, it unfolded in a distant land. North Korean troops invaded South Korea, prompting the United Nations to intervene, and US B-29s were swiftly deployed to the region to target northern factories and communications. Despite not being ideally suited for this role, the B-29s effectively carried out their missions, securing US dominance of the skies over Korea. However, on November 1, 1950, American pilots were surprised to encounter the first Russian-built MiG-15s. These aircraft represented a significant technological leap beyond what the Soviets were previously believed to possess. Even with their defensive armament, B-29s stood little chance against these advanced Soviet fighters. In response to this new threat, the Pentagon ordered F-86s to be deployed to Korea, marking the beginning of the intense MiG versus Saber aerial combat.
The first four
contrails and keep a close watch on the fighter bombers. The last two flights will go above the contrails and check very closely for any MiG aircraft that might come in above the cons. Now, if you see MiGs up there today, call them out. Give their altitude, direction, and geographical location on the map. And call it out and then get off the radio. Now remember, once you look around, keep your speed up. And if you do get a bounce, cut him off and drive in range. When you get in range, shoot, and when you shoot, shoot to kill. Anybody got any questions? Okay, let's go get them.
Typically, Saber forces operated in groups of 4 aircraft.
Tiger lead, Tiger 2 here. I got a couple bogeys out there with one coming around at 2 level. Roger, boy, I got him.
By 1952, American pilots had engaged MiG-15s in numerous successful sorties. Similar to the dynamics of the Second World War, a group of elite aces emerged, men who demonstrated exceptional skill and determination in combat with their fighters. One of these American aces was Colonel Gabreski. Gabreski arrived in Korea already decorated as an ace, having flown Thunderbolts during World War II, but he further cemented his reputation as a MiG killer. The skill and experience of American pilots were crucial, considering that the MiG-15 itself was a formidable aircraft. While MiG kills outnumbered Saber losses, the MiG-15 was undeniably a brilliant aircraft and, in several aspects, superior to the Saber. Due to the MiG-15's impressive performance, the Air Force was eager to acquire one to study its design and capabilities, and in the later stages of the conflict, dropped leaflets over enemy territory offering enemy pilots $100,000 if they defected with their plane to the south. One pilot, Lieutenant Rowe, accepted the offer, and it must have been a surprising sight for the ground crew at Kimpo on September 21, 1953, when a MiG-15 landed. The aircraft was soon in the hands of American pilots, eager to fly and evaluate the MiG for themselves. One of the standout features of the MiG-15 was its armament, a combination of one 37mm and two 23mm cannon mounted in a compact, removable unit. This setup allowed for quick replacement by ground crew, enabling rapid turnaround times for the aircraft. The borrowed MiG, equipped with ammunition, provided an opportunity to test its firepower. Aircraft equipped with heavy cannon typically have a slower rate of fire compared to the 6 machine guns on the Saber, but they deliver significantly greater hitting power. The MiG's armament prompted the US to develop a configuration for the Saber, featuring 4 20mm cannon, replacing the original 6 50mm machine guns. Despite arriving late in the Korean conflict, the cannon-equipped Saber achieved several MiG kills. However, for most of the campaign, it was the Saber's machine guns, known for their high rate of fire, that brought down the majority of the MiGs. Pilots were trained to approach the enemy not directly from behind, but slightly from the side, as this angle presented a larger fuselage surface to target. Despite the Saber's superior design and firepower, the F-86s faced formidable challenges. Nevertheless, the original Saber design's excellence and its robust airframe proved crucial. Many aircraft returned home with significant damage, yet were still airworthy, a testament to the Saber's durability and the skill of its pilots. The Saber's heavy armor for pilots played a crucial role in saving many lives during the Korean conflict. As the Korean conflict progressed, American aces were redeployed to train new pilots in combat techniques specific to the F-86. This approach, where experienced pilots passed on their skills to younger aviators, was a pivotal part of the American strategy that ultimately prevailed in the Korean air conflict. Given the MiG-15's comparable overall capability to the Saber, the skill of the pilots was often the deciding factor in engagements. Had the MiG been in the hands of better trained pilots, the outcome of the conflict might have been very different. It was the greater competence and better training of the American pilots with their consequent greater skill that was the real margin between the two planes. Preparing for flight was a complex and weighty process for the pilot. They would have to don a heavy flight suit along with a lined vest and carry the obligatory .45 automatic. Additionally, they had to don a Mae West life preserver, an essential parachute, and a survival kit containing various items from a rubber raft to a homing beacon. By the time they settled into the Saber cockpit, complete with helmet and oxygen mask, they likely felt deeply integrated with the aircraft. This connection between pilot and machine was not just symbolic, but also essential to the effectiveness of US fighters during the Korean campaign. The Saber's design allowed for significant versatility in its role. Originally an interceptor, it could also be configured to carry air-to-ground rockets or bombs when necessary. The Saber's design versatility made it well suited for roles beyond interception. Although it was seldom used in interdiction missions during the Korean War, other countries in different theaters employed the F-86 very effectively as a ground attack aircraft. In the mid-1950s, just after the Korean conflict, the US developed air-to-air homing missiles like the innovative Sidewinder. These missiles were integrated onto Sabers to enhance their interception capabilities. In this scenario, a standard 5-inch unguided rocket is fired from one side of an F-86 to serve as a test target for the Sidewinder missile fired from the other side. The Saber's production extended beyond the United States, with manufacturing in Canada and Australia and assembly in Italy and Japan. However, one of the most intriguing developments occurred in Australia. The Royal Australian Air Force sought an enhanced version of the Saber, leading to a comprehensive redesign by the Commonwealth Aircraft Factory. They strengthened and lengthened the fuselage to accommodate the Avon engine, also used in their Canberra bombers. This engine provided 50% more thrust than the early Saber engines, although integrating it posed significant challenges. The Australian Saber emerged as the most powerful variant produced. While its maximum speed wasn't significantly higher than the American version, it boasted superior acceleration and lifting capabilities. The large letter P on the side of this plane is the standard Commonwealth symbol for prototype, similar to the Y used by American aircraft. Australia produced 112 Avon-powered Sabers, some of which were transferred to the Indonesian Air Force as they were replaced by the French Mirage. By the early 1960s, the Saber, still in service with many nations, was beginning to show its age. While the addition of Sidewinder missiles bolstered its effectiveness as an interceptor, no aircraft, even the renowned F-86, could remain in the front line indefinitely. Moreover, North American Aviation had introduced a successor in the form of the F-100 Super Saber. Larger and capable of speeds up to 1,000 miles per hour, the F-100 Super Saber marked the beginning of the famed Century series of American fighter aircraft. In the early 1960s, the Sabers were gradually phased out and reassigned to roles within the Home Guard. Here, a pilot inspects an F-86 Saber that has been relegated to Home Guard duties. Once again, the synergy between pilot and aircraft proves to be highly effective, even in this new capacity. The skills and experience of a combat veteran are invaluable to the nation, and so is the enduring value of the investment in a well-built and long-serving aircraft like the F-86 Saber. Even after its retirement from frontline service, the Saber continued to serve a vital role in the hands of skilled and dedicated aircrew within the Home Guard, providing a robust second line of defense. In the United States, the F-86 remained operational with National Guard squadrons well into the 1970s, and it continues to be flown by air forces in various countries around the world. The design, originating in the 1940s, has proven exceptionally durable, not only because of the Saber's solid construction, but also because it consistently fulfilled its mission requirements.
In 1951, a Mikoyan Goryevich MiG-15 is shot down over Korea's west coast and plummets into the Yellow Sea. The jet is pulled from the shallow water by US and South Korean forces, transported by a British frigate for study. At a US Air Force base in Dayton, Ohio, the plane is pored over. One of the first discoveries of this incredible aircraft comes when the engine is inspected. Expecting to find a hybrid of Russian and German jet technology, the team studying the captured prize receive a shock. The plane is powered by what appears to be a Rolls-Royce Nene 2, designed in England. 1940. Since the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Germany and the Soviet Union have been in an alliance, using their combined might to carve up Eastern Europe. With France giving in quickly to the Nazis, England's newly appointed Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, knows that German troops will soon be clambering up the English beachfront. He decides to send a new ambassador to Moscow, and a member of Parliament volunteers for the job. He is Richard Stafford Cripps. Born into privilege, Cripps' first love is chemistry, and following a stint as an ambulance driver during the Great War, he studies law and becomes a successful attorney, before an interest in politics lures him to run for office. Cripps joins the Labour Party, and in 1930 becomes Solicitor General in Ramsay MacDonald's government, a position that includes the honour of becoming a knight. Though regarded by all as a brilliant man, Sir Stafford Cripps has a tendency to ruffle feathers, and soon finds himself clashing with Labour over his political leanings. Some of his views are considered so extremely left-wing by the Labour Party that he's chased out. Now sitting as an independent, he finds himself on a trip to Moscow, with a goal of aligning the Soviet Union with Britain.
Stafford Cripps was certainly born into a life of privilege, and his father was a Conservative MP. This no doubt stimulated his own interest in politics. But what I think really led him into his own particular line in politics was really his religion. We can't understand Stafford Cripps unless we understand that he was a committed Christian who had very fervent beliefs. In some ways they seem rather naive, though certainly idealistic. He believed in the brotherhood of man. The crucial event for him was really the economic crisis of 1931, when Britain was hit by the so-called economic blizzard that swept away the Labour government and seemed to indicate that the capitalist system simply wasn't coping and couldn't cope. This led Cripps from being a moderate member of the Labour Party into adopting Marxism, which naturally involved a degree of sympathy with the Soviet Union.
In 1940, while the Battle of Britain rages, Cripps arrives in Moscow. While hope is high that he can steer Russia into an alliance with England, early results are not at all promising. Just days after Cripps has a 3-hour meeting with Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Premier and Foreign Commissar Vyacheslav Molotov gives a speech on how successful the Russian-German alliance has been for the country. Krips continually warns Stalin not to trust Hitler, but to no avail.
The key episode was really from 1940 to 1941, when he went to Russia as Britain's ambassador. And what he found there certainly changed his view and formed what to many people will seem a surprisingly unfavourable view of Soviet Russia for such a left-wing figure.
From his book, The Krips Version, Dr. Peter Clark reads Krips' correspondence with his daughter during the politician's time as ambassador in Russia.
He's talking about the regime and says that it has many difficulties, perhaps due partly because they're inherent in every form of dictatorship. And he continues in this way: if to all these difficulties you add the government by secret police and spies, which is the only method for a dictatorship, then in such a country as this, with a people of this kind apt to intrigue and brought up in underground revolutionary activities, you get perpetual change of personnel and liquidation of many of the more intelligent people, creating new difficulties of organisation. In the passage I just quoted, we see already, surely, that Krips accepts that this is essentially a dictatorship, it is essentially a police state, that it is in many ways a deeply unattractive society. During the war, admittedly, he argued very strongly in favour of alliance with Russia as the best way to beat Hitler's Germany. But long before the end of the war, he was certainly no ideological captive of the communist system.
Within a year, Krips' warnings about Hitler's trustworthiness become all too real, and Stalin must face the awful truth. Operation Barbarossa begins, as Nazi Germany storms into Soviet-controlled territory and pushes Stalin's forces back. It's a swift, fiery onslaught that knocks the Red Army back on its heels. It's a turn of events which suits Winston Churchill just fine. Not only does this new Eastern Front relieve some of the pressure on his troops, but it gives him, and particularly Krips, clout with Stalin and amongst the Russians. A bond is forged over their common enemy, and soon an Anglo-Russian alliance is formed. But Churchill may be on shaky ground at home. Not only do the Russian politicians embrace Krips, but the British public do as well. After a broadcast to the nation on the situation in Russia, Krips is suddenly one of the most popular men in the nation, even seen as a contender for the position of Prime Minister. At a time when defeats are plentiful, Krips makes it known that he'd be ready to take up the post if Churchill is unable to manage. Churchill seizes on this. In March of 1942, he sends his new rival to India in order to broker a deal with Gandhi and Jinnah. If the Krips mission is a success, India will aid the war effort against the Nazis in exchange for self-rule once the conflict is at an end. But the mixed messages Krips seems to be giving to the Indian negotiators during the trip causes it to end with no deal in place. The Indian Congress Party will not agree to aid England in the war. But aid is coming from another source. Through its Lend-Lease program, the United States of America begins to send supplies to the Allied forces in exchange for gold. They supply vast numbers of vehicles throughout the war, and Britain is the main beneficiary of the deal. The Soviet Union is far behind the West in technological advances, and needs aid as well. Russia receives close to 15,000 aircraft by the war's end, almost 20% of all the aircraft that they use. The most prominent of these is the Bell P-39 Airacobra. It's best suited for low-altitude flight due to its lack of turbo superchargers. Its unconventional layout, with the engine behind the pilot, leaves little room for storing fuel. The standard load is carried in the P-39's wings. It's therefore limited to short-range tactical strikes. The most advanced fighters and bombers the Americans keep for themselves. It aggravates the Soviets to be given the older technology, but they make do with what they're given. Of the equipment delivered, much of it is not suited to combat on the Eastern Front. Aircraft meant for tropical conditions are now used in a much colder climate. There are few spare parts, and so crews must sometimes improvise as best they can. The Soviets learned to adapt the Western technology to their needs and uses, skills that will serve them well in the years to come. 1945. First, Nazi Germany falls, and then so does Winston Churchill. The general election on July the 5th knocks the Conservatives from power and brings in a new Labour government, led by the wartime coalition government's Deputy Prime Minister, Clement Attlee. The public feels that the Labour Party will be more adept at helping England rebuild in the post-war period. Joining Attlee's cabinet as Minister of the Board of Trade is Sir Stafford Cripps.
The election of a Labour government in 1945 came as a great surprise to the world, who imagined that Winston Churchill would inevitably win re-election, having won the war. I think it's important to realise the strong elements of continuity, especially in foreign policy, that went over from Churchill's coalition wartime government, in which Labour had played a big part, into the post-war Labour government.
The main thrust of this new government is to rebuild the war-weathered country. It's about winning the peace by giving Britons a crutch to lean on. They use the 1942 Beveridge Report as a guide for reforming the country. Attlee brings about sweeping changes that will alter the country for decades to come. Free national health care, education for everyone up to the age of 15, social security. He works towards giving India and Burma their freedom. It's far removed from the direction that their ally America is heading. More and more nations adopt communism, and never comfortable with these ideals, America finds these new social developments within Britain curious and worrisome. Churchill was the sort of man Americans understood, and Attlee is no Churchill. He's small and modest, spares his words when they aren't needed. To Americans, the contrast is a sharp one that gives them pause. Labour's domestic policies seem much closer to communism than to capitalism.
Foreign policy was largely in the hands of the Prime Minister Clement Attlee and the very strong Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin. Now, both of them, in 1945 and 1946, were ready to take a much stronger line against the Soviet Union and its threat to the integrity of states in Eastern Europe than the Americans were at the time. So Attlee and Bevin had to argue with President Truman about the need to stand up to Soviet Russia. It wasn't really until events took their own course during 1946 that, in a sense, Truman came round to the rather harder line that the British government was already following. It's therefore somewhat surprising to find that in popular politics in the United States, Britain, simply because it had a Labour government, was then perceived as a weak link in the Western alliance. If you come down to the realities of the situation, you see that it's in fact British policy that is actually more consistent through the 1940s in taking a firm line in opposing Soviet expansionism. And Cripps, for all his previous sympathy with the Soviet Union, is firmly in support of the line of the government of which he's a leading member.
America's astounding capacity for production kept Britain well supplied during its darkest days following the Battle of Britain and supplemented their renewed manufacturing throughout the rest of the war. And now, very suddenly, the Lend-Lease program, that boon to Allied nations throughout the war, ends. America turns off the tap and stops the flow of resources into Britain. Not only that, they send the bill. Over £1 billion to be paid back over a 50-year period. As America is entering a post-war boom in prosperity, Britain is withering under its immense debt and damaged infrastructure. 750,000 homes damaged or destroyed. 1/3 of gold reserves spent. Food rationing becomes more stringent than it had been during the war. Coal, an absolute necessity for providing Britain with heat and manufacturing, is scarce.
We shall only get it right if we can produce much more than we did before the war. That's the only way we can get the things we need: food, clothes, entertainment, a little less struggle to live, a decent home and warmth. We want colour in our lives, a better education for the kids, bigger pensions for the old people, and all the rest. No doubt we're in a bit of a tough spot, and it'll take a year or two to get out. But we've done it before, and we can do it again.
And while the post-war situation is tumultuous for the common people, it's a windfall for the Allied militaries. Germany's defeat sees its treasure trove of technological secrets scatter for anyone looking to pick up the pieces. The Allied nations rush into German territory to recruit the top scientists and to integrate these advancements into their own country's technology. Russian forces lay their hands on the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin and the many secrets within it: swept wings, rocket power, and the jet engine. With this information, they can make a vast leap ahead and finally begin to catch up to the Western powers. And since the pre-war days, when Stalin assessed his nation to be 50 to 100 years behind Western technology, the Soviet Union has been making great advancements. One Soviet manufacturer, the Mikoyan Guryevich Design Bureau, has been creating aircraft since 1940, establishing a solid reputation for creating fighter planes. Their first post-war design, the MiG-9, is powered by a copy of the captured German BMW 003 engine. As early jets go, it has a fairly conventional design: an all-metal fuselage with straight wings. For their second-generation jet aircraft, they'll be incorporating some new ideas in aerodynamics. But for all the advancements that they'd like to implement, the power plant is not up to snuff. The German jet engine that the Russians discover has its flaws. The axial flow system, while powerful, is difficult to maintain. Engines quickly burn out and must be replaced. Their short lifespans plagued German ground crews throughout the war, and though the Soviets pursue the creation of their own jet engine based on this technology, they find themselves facing the very same problems the Germans had. Germany's most advanced jet engine design is proving difficult to perfect. The new airframe designs that Mikoyan Guryevich are creating will need something more advanced and reliable than the adapted German engine. To keep up with Western development, Russia will need a centrifugal flow jet engine, like Frank Whittle has developed in England. While not as powerful as the axial engine, it's reliable and has been a proven performer. Rolls-Royce has continued to make developments using Whittle's ideas, and currently have the Nene 2 engine, which, despite its great power, has only thus far been used in prototypes of the Hawker Seahawk and the failed Supermarine Attacker. Without an advanced jet engine, Russia's aircraft development will be at a standstill. The Soviet aviation minister Mikhail Khrushchev and designer Alexander Yakovlev suggest to Stalin that they purchase more advanced engines from another country. Stalin scoffs at Khrushchev's idea. What fool will sell us his secrets, he asks. Despite knowing that his men will fail on their journey to purchase this technology, Stalin allows the trade mission to go ahead. MiG's Artem Mikoyan, engine designer Vladimir Klimov, and others travel to England to tour Rolls-Royce's plant and to see other British aircraft developments. When the trade mission lands in London, they find a socialist government ready to embrace them. There's still much goodwill afforded to Russia, still seen by British eyes as an ally in the noble war against Nazi forces. That, and post-war England, needs money. The Soviet delegation tours the Rolls-Royce plant and are shown their latest engine developments, the Derwent and the Neen. They ask to purchase several of each. When the order comes across the desk of a Ministry of Supply employee, he warns Minister John Wilmot against selling the Soviets the technology. Britain is the absolute leader in jet engines. Russia is at least 5 years away from similar developments. Selling them one of the nation's greatest achievements would be, as Stalin has said, foolish. But the sale is pushed through by the President of the Board of Trade, Sir Stafford Cripps.
I think it was a socialist move to a socialist government, or an extreme Soviet government. We'd helped the Soviets before, or the Stalinists before, of course, at the beginning of World War II. But here I think this was going beyond the call of duty after the end of the war. And it certainly hurled them straight into the Premier League in aviation.
Despite a distrust of Stalin after his time in Moscow, Cripps sees the world breaking into two spheres of influence and wants to bring those sides together. Not only that, the sale means a good deal of money for Rolls-Royce at a time when big contracts are hard to come by. Cripps even offers to allow the Soviets to build the engine themselves under license.
The circumstances of the sale of the Rolls-Royce engines to Russia can't be divorced from Britain's economic predicament after the war, with a desperate need to increase exports. Cripps, as President of the Board of Trade, was the minister with primary responsibility for British trade. It's only natural, therefore, that he should have wanted to encourage expansion of British trade and opportunities for British exports in every direction possible. And certainly in 1946, he was taking the view that Russia was a promising export market as far as British manufacturers were concerned. I think it's only natural, given all the circumstances, that he would have wanted to approve the sale of aircraft engines, which, after all, at that time, were not regarded as classified or restricted, had not been put under any sort of military ban. And there's frankly no need to seek further for an ideological explanation of his decision to approve a deal that he saw simply as being in the British national interest in order to revive British trade.
While Cripps' actions on the sale may have been honest, the Soviet delegations are less so. Rather than accepting the license, the Russian engine manufacturer Klimov begins to reverse engineer the Neen from the examples they've purchased. The Russians begin producing a version, the Klimov RD-45. But creating a successful engine is proving difficult. England has a long history of metallurgy dating back centuries. Small forges all over the British Isles have developed techniques to create strong metals from ores and minerals found throughout the empire that are perfect at handling the high stresses and heat associated with the power of a jet engine. Russian metallurgy is not nearly as advanced, and they find this one of their main stumbling blocks in duplicating the engine. The Neen can run 500 hours between overhauls, but the Klimov copy doesn't last more than 100. They increase the size of the combustion chambers and turbine and refine the alloys used to create the engine. This new model is known as the Klimov VK1. With the engine ready, they can now finalize designs. In April of 1947, the Council of Ministers issue a decree ordering Mikhail Goryevich to build 2 prototypes of a new jet fighter, one that will put the Soviet Union ahead of the field in aircraft design. The Boeing B-29 has been America's frontline bomber since the final year of World War II. It's a revolutionary leap ahead of other aircraft, with its pressurized cabin and computer-assisted gun turrets. And now that the United States has the atomic bomb, the Soviet Union needs the future capabilities to defend against a bomber entering their territory with one of these tremendous weapons. The Council of Ministers want an interceptor for just such a situation. Mikoyan Gurevich looks back at their earlier aircraft to see any lessons they can learn. Their experimental canard plane, the MiG-8, had swept wings, a feature that they're interested in exploring further. Some captured German designs, like the TA-183 Hookebein, had swept wings implemented as well. Their latest jet, the MiG-9, has been promising, and they used this as the base to build from. Its engine troubles have been solved with the Klimov engine in place of the BMW power plant. It will also receive newly designed wings, swept back at an angle of 35 degrees. After some additional refinements, this new creation, the MiG-15, has a top speed of over 650 miles per hour. Though early production aircraft have a tendency to roll, these problems are lessened by adding aerodynamic trimmers near the ailerons and rudder. It's also recommended that pilots stay below Mach 0.9 to lessen any other stability problems. Test combat trials are conducted with a captured B-29 as well as the Soviet copy, the Tu-4. To shoot down the superfortress, the MiG-15 is armed with two 23mm cannons and a single 37mm cannon. In 1949, production stops on the MiG-9 and the MiG-15 enters the Soviet Air Force. June the 25th, 1950. North Korean troops cross the 38th parallel into South Korean territory. By July the 5th, American forces have joined with the South Korean army. The United Nations also enters the fray under the guise of a police action. Soon, the conflict escalates beyond a ground war when the US calls for strategic bombing with its B-29s. In addition, piston-engine fighters like the Mustang and the Corsair, left over from the Second World War, are joined by the jet-powered Gloster Meteor and the F-80 Shooting Star. With the South Korean forces bolstered by UN support, North Korea also looks outside its borders for help. In October, Chairman Mao Zedong of China, fearing that a US occupation of the Korean peninsula would eventually lead to war with his country, sends a volunteer army into the fray. The North Korean and Chinese leaders ask Stalin for help, and while the Soviet dictator is unwilling to send in ground forces, he does provide aircraft in the form of the MiG-15 jet fighters, painted in Chinese colors to mask Soviet involvement. Soviet pilots are sent to train North Korean and Chinese airmen how to fly the fighter jets. They're taught simple Chinese phrases and dressed in Chinese uniforms and sent into the skies to combat and shoot down B-29s and engage the UN fighter forces. The piston-engine planes like the Mustang and the first-generation straight-winged jets are no match for the abilities of the MiG-15. It's faster, can fly higher and longer than any of its opponents. The Soviet victories come fast and often. The American pilots use their years of dogfighting experience to counter the superior technology at their enemy's disposal, but it's not always enough. Soon, B-29s are forced to limit their bombing runs to nighttime.
The first sighting of the MiG-15 in the Korean War, I think, had the same impact on pilots that as did the first sighting of the Focke-Wulf 190 just after the Battle of Britain, when it appeared in Europe. And we had nothing really to compare with it for the next year. Its success was due to two factors. One was the jet engine they had, the Nin, and the second one was, of course, the data they got from the captured German sources on the sweepback, wing sweepback. So it was a twin contribution, if you like.
Soviet air superiority begins to change in December of 1950, with the arrival of an all-new fighter aircraft for the American forces, the F-86 Saber. First developed as the straight-winged FJ Fury jet, its design has changed to incorporate 35-degree swept-back wings and automatic slats. The Saber is not a leap ahead of the Soviet jet, but it does level the playing field. The discovery of an advanced British engine in the fuselage of a Russian-designed plane infuriates the Americans. This is not the first time the Soviets have made a huge leap ahead in military technology. The August 1949 detonation of Russia's first atomic bomb showed just how far they could advance technologically in a few years, with some outside help. First, Klaus Fuchs, a German-born scientist brought in by England to work on the Manhattan Project, has been arrested for providing the Soviet Union with atomic bomb designs. And at the moment, Donald Maclean, a high-ranking British Foreign Ministry official, is suspected by the FBI of providing the Soviets with a variety of information. As the British representative on the American, Canadian and British Atomic Secrets Council during the war, he's had access to nuclear secrets at a time when the quest for the bomb was known only to a few. It's in the autumn that UN forces finally get their hands on the MiG-15 and discover the secret of its power plant. It's confirmed when two men are dropped behind enemy lines to a crashed MiG-15 dug into the ground. No chance to remove the entire wreck, they use grenades to separate the engine. The Americans are livid. How could England have handed over a piece of powerful technology to Stalin's regime? But they have little time to blame Sir Stafford Cripps for selling the engines to their enemies. He's been retired for close to a year due to failing health. In October, Winston Churchill's Conservatives edge out the Labour Party, knocking Attlee out of government. Churchill, as Prime Minister once more, makes Anglo-American relations a priority again, and with him back in power, there's little chance that the Soviets will find any socialists to sell them other technology. In the northwest of Korea, in an area along the Yalu River, the first large-scale jet versus jet air battles of history take place, in an area dubbed MiG Alley. When the Sabres reach MiG Alley, they have only 20 minutes of fuel to engage the enemy with. The MiG-15s, with their bases nearby, can linger much longer. American pilots charge in at 40,000 feet, only to find the MiG-15s flying 10,000 feet above them. The MiGs hide in the sun's glare, then swoop in as a formation of Sabres are on patrol. The Russian fighter does have its share of weaknesses. The cannons it's equipped with, while powerful, have a low rate of fire compared to the Saber's guns. It also has poor stalling characteristics. A Saber pilot can force a MiG-15 into a dive that becomes a spin that cannot be recovered from. The combat experience of the United Nations pilots ultimately trumps the sophistication of the Soviet plane. By war's end, the UN forces have shot down 900 enemy aircraft, almost 800 of which are MiG-15s. But the aircraft has proven that the Soviets can use a blend of ingenuity and craftiness to match the West's innovation. Between the USSR, Czechoslovakia, Poland and China, over 16,000 MiG-15s are produced. In 1958, Rolls-Royce Deputy Chairman Whitney Straight is touring a factory in China when he sees an engine curiously similar to the Nien. Discovering that its origins lie in the reverse engineering of the Nien, he attempts to collect payment for the almost 50,000 engines that Klimov made by taking and adapting the design and licensing it to other countries for the MiG-15 and later aircraft. £200 million is the compensation he's looking for. he leaves without one farthing. The man whose decision led to the jet engine being copied is long since gone. Sir Stafford Cripps dies in April of 1952 in the midst of the Korean War. And while he's remembered mainly for his contributions to Britain's war effort and the post-war cultural shift, he will forever be tied to the MiG-15 by that one decision.
Cripps has always been, to a large extent, the prisoner of his own reputation, but it was a reputation that shifted over time. In the 1930s, his own high principles led him to take a very extreme political position on the far left of the political spectrum, arguing that only full-blooded socialism or even communism could offer an answer to the economic problems of the day. By the 1940s, Cripps's position is quite different from what it had been 10 years previously. It took people, quite naturally, some time to catch up with the rather rapid evolution through which he'd gone.
An evolution which is often overshadowed in aviation circles by this gift to Russia. A decision that may have been motivated by all the right reasons, but strengthens the might of the Soviet military for years to come.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks' Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
The only reason for an airplane to exist is to go fast. At the Great Air Meet in Rheims, Glenn Curtis set a world's record of just over 43 miles an hour, and the quest for speed was on. In 1913, Maurice Prévost was flying a streamlined Dépôt-Dessin monoplane at 126 miles an hour, and Europe claimed the lead in aviation speed. Immediately after World War I, quest for speed became a catalyst for the development of fighter planes. Countries which had not invested in new engines for their wartime fighters would, for reasons of national pride, invest in new engines to race them peacetime. Then, in America in the 1930s, the situation reversed itself. Civilian aircraft, like the Travel Air Mystery Ship and the GB, Waddell Williams racers, became even faster than military aircraft. The reason was simple. Same engines were available to both civil racers and military fighters. The fighters had to carry guns, bombs, oxygen, and radios, while the racers were built only for speed. The world's absolute speed record was passed from country to country. And as the racers became faster and more powerful, they also became more expensive. America's Howard Hughes could afford to build his own racer, and with it set a land-plane speed record. But the absolute speed record of 440 miles an hour was set by a Macchi MC-72 seaplane in 1934, financed by the Italian government. Then military aircraft came back into the lead as the Heinkel and Messerschmitt firms competed for the title. Messerschmitt Bf-109R set a speed record of 469 miles an hour in 1939, a record that lasted for many years. When the jet aircraft came out, speed records rapidly accelerated, the British breaking 1,000 miles an hour in 1956 in a Fairey Delta II. Speeds continued to climb, finally reaching 2,193 miles an hour in 1976 by the Lockheed SR-71, alias Blackbird. While speed was the object, there were many other benefits in creating ever faster aircraft. Improvement in fuels, streamlining, lubricants, materials, and the list goes on. Speed produced not only prestige and pleasure, but also utility. The speed record setters ultimately paved the way for commercial transports, business jets, and private plane.